There is a plant in nearly every office building constructed before 1990 that no one remembers choosing. It sat on filing cabinets. It hung in macrame slings above reception desks. It filled the corners of hospital waiting rooms, hotel lobbies, and government buildings, asking nothing, surviving everything. It became so common that it became invisible, and that, precisely, is the danger of a species too successful to notice. What saturates a culture entirely is rarely questioned. It is simply assumed to have always been there. It had not always been there. This is ancient food files. We exist to recover what familiarity has buried. If you have not yet subscribed, do so now, not for growth, but because this archive only survives if it is kept. What follows is a record of how a rainforest organism became furniture, and what was quietly left behind in the transition. Before you continue watching, please check the link I provided in this video's description. That way, you can verify it yourself. The genus Philodendron was first collected from the wild as early as 1644, by the naturalist Georg Markgraf, working in the forests of Brazil. Later expeditions followed, Charles Plumier through Martinique, Hispaniola, and St. Thomas, Nicolaus Joseph Jacquin through the West Indies, Colombia, and Venezuela. For nearly 2 centuries, the plant had no proper name of its own. European botanists, uncertain where to place it, filed it under Arum, a genus it did not truly resemble. The confusion was not malicious. It was simply the limit of a system trying to organize a world it had only just begun to see. But the people who lived among these vines long before any European arrived already had a working knowledge of them. Among the Karaja people of the Amazon, philodendron fiber was woven into ceremonial headbands, green and red, functional rather than decorative, a use entirely without aesthetic motive, built from necessity and proximity. In the Tupi-Guarani tradition, the climbing vine carried names that predate Linnaean taxonomy by centuries, names that encoded behavior rather than appearance, a plant that loved trees, a plant that lived 2 lives. It was not given its scientific name until 1829, when the Austrian botanist Heinrich Wilhelm Schott formally separated it from Arum, philo, love, dendron, tree, the tree-loving plant. Even in translation, something of its true nature survived the journey into Latin. What makes philodendron biologically unusual is its capacity to live 2 distinct lives within a single organism. A seedling germinates in the deep shade of the forest floor, then grows not toward the sun, but toward the nearest dark silhouette, a tree trunk, a shadow against the canopy. Once it reaches the trunk, it climbs. Aerial roots grip bark with mechanical patience. The connection to soil, no longer necessary, is eventually severed at the base, and the plant becomes epiphytic, drawing moisture directly from humid air. Botanists call this transformation secondary hemi-epiphytism, a life strategy almost unheard of outside this family. The plant trades early access to soil nutrients for early access to light, and when the trade no longer serves it, it simply trades back. If it falls to the forest floor, it does not die. It begins climbing again, from wherever it lands. This redundancy made the plant nearly impossible to kill through ordinary neglect. It was, without intending to be, perfectly suited for a future its native forest could not have imagined, a future of dim corridors, sealed windows, and inconsistent care. That future began to take shape in Florida, in the final years of the 19th century, when a young plant explorer named David Fairchild started searching the world for organisms the United States did not yet possess. Fairchild worked for the Office of Foreign Seed and Plant Introduction, and over the course of his career he brought more than 75,000 plants into the country: soybeans, dates, flowering cherries, pistachios, mangoes. In 1916, his wife purchased land on Biscayne Bay in a settlement called Coconut Grove, and the family built a home they named the Kampong, after the family compounds of Java. Fairchild filled its grounds with cuttings gathered from his travels through the tropics. Among them, philodendrons took root easily in the Florida humidity, as though the peninsula had been waiting for them. By 1928, heartleaf philodendron had entered commercial greenhouse production for the first time, supporting an industry built on America's economic recovery. The timing was not incidental. The country was rebuilding, and indoor foliage offered something rare in an unstable decade, a controlled, replicable form of nature that required no weather, no season, no uncertainty. By the 1940s it was a foliage industry staple alongside Norfolk Island pine. By the 1960s, Florida accounted for the majority of the nation's wholesale foliage trade. The wholesale value of American foliage plants rose from $29 million in 1969 to $585 million by 2001. Behind that figure sat a single, recurring organism, propagated by the millions, asking only for indirect light and the absence of frost. Miami did not simply grow the plant, it built an identity around it. Architects translated the philodendron's heart-shaped leaf directly into the built environment. Francisco Brennan's tiled facade for the Bacardi Imports headquarters in 1962. Morris Lapidus's interiors at the Fontainebleau and Eden Rock, announcing to sun-seeking tourists that they had arrived somewhere tropical, somewhere foreign, somewhere other. The plant that had once been a Tupi-Guarani working knowledge became, within a few American decades, a symbol of vacation. Visual artists absorbed it into their own language. The Brazilian painter Roberto Burle Marx rendered it in still life in 1943. Photographers staged Brazilian Emperor Dom Pedro II among tropical foliage rather than on his throne, allowing the plant to stand in for an entire national identity he wished to project. The plant that filled American offices, then, was no longer simply the plant that grew in the Amazon understory. Industrial cultivation required uniformity, predictable leaf size, predictable growth rate, predictable tolerance for poor light and irregular care. What could not be standardized was discarded from the trade. The Caraja headbands, the Tupi-Guarani understanding of which insects fed on which leaf, the indigenous comprehension of the plant as a living system rather than a product, none of it traveled with the cuttings. What crossed into cultivation was the shape, stripped of the forest that had given the shape its original meaning. Unmanageable knowledge does not propagate easily in a greenhouse ledger, only the plant itself does. By the 1980s, tissue culture technology allowed growers to multiply a single elite specimen at industrial scale, working from meristem cells alone, microscopic tissue extracted from a single parent organism and cloned indefinitely, filling greenhouse shelves on 3 continents with genetically identical descendants. What modern horticultural science had essentially rediscovered, through laboratory means, was a trait the plant had always possessed in the wild: the refusal to fully die, the readiness to regenerate from almost nothing. The forest's redundancy became the industry's efficiency. The forest never asked to be replicated this way. It does not require the office, the hospital corridor, the macrame sling, or the Miami hotel facade to justify its persistence. The philodendron survives in the deep shade of the Amazon understory exactly as it always has, climbing toward darkness, finding the trunk, beginning again if it falls, indifferent to whether the world above remembers where it came from. What was never lost was the plant's patience. It is still there, in 2 places at once, soil and canopy, root and air, asking nothing of the rooms it now occupies by the millions. The shape was always borrowed. The plant was simply patient enough to outlast the explanation for why. If this record matters to you, subscribe to Ancient Food Files. Every entry preserved here is one that would otherwise pass without a witness.